Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast, the podcast dedicated to healthcare security, safety, and emergency management. If you are involved with a healthcare security program or desire to be, this podcast is for you. Join the conversation as we discuss the issues that matter to healthcare security professionals while leveraging the expertise of healthcare security thought leaders and experts in personal development. And now, here's your host, Brian Hamilton.
Before we jump into the show, I just want to thank my sponsors and collaborators. 3D Network Technology, reliability is our core value. Visit www.3dnetworktechnology.com. And Genetec, delivering security strategies for healthcare. Visit Genetec, that's GENETEC.com for more information. We'd also like to thank the Change Execution Group and 360 Life Transformations. Visit www.360lifetransformations.com. We'd also like to thank Canadian Security Magazine and Omnigo Software. And now, let's get into today's show. Thank you for joining us on the Healthcare Security Cast. On today's episode, I am joined by Christian West. Christian, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Now, I'll open up by allowing you to introduce yourself to everybody who's listening in on the conversation today. And I'm going to do that by asking you, who is Christian West?
Well, Christian West is obviously me. I'm originally from Denmark, now living in the US. I've been over here about 12 years by now. Lived here 25 years ago for a couple of years, and has been going back and forth ever since. I been spending most of my adult life in protection, meaning executive protection, bodyguard, celebrity protection, traveled all over the world, protected all kinds of different people in all kinds of different environments. And that's what I still do, and that's what I'm passionate about. And it's it's pretty much all I know and all I've done for the past many years. So that's Christian West in a really short fashion, I guess, or version.
Awesome. Now, I'm curious, just for my own knowledge, what made you come from Denmark to the US?
Well, that's a question I get all the time. And, I actually came over here twice. The first time I came because, believe it or not, some Danish musicians or producers has gotten a contract to produce rap music out of all kinds of music in the US. And they needed a security guy. And what is more natural than to ask the local bouncer that they already know if he wants to come with them to the US, where there's more security people probably than anywhere else in the world. But that was the first time I came over, and I worked with them for a number of years. And then I went back to Denmark, started my first security company, and worked in Europe. And eventually, I was lucky enough to land some contracts with some American companies, and I worked for them all over the world. And eventually they asked me to bid on stuff in America, and we did, and we were lucky enough to win it. And then it was time to pack up the bags and come over here. So it's been purely for work, but I love living in America. So it has suited me well.
Awesome. So I want to kind of circle back to that a little bit as well. So when you came over with the, with the musicians, was that really your introduction to executive protection and close protection type details?
It kind of was, but it was a lot different than what I do today, because first of all, this is back in the late 90s. So executive protection wasn't really a thing. We were still at kind of like the last generation of or I wouldn't even say the last generation. It was still more like bodyguards. And it was all about protecting celebrities and protecting these producers who a lot of times were out with the musicians and stuff like that, right? And to be honest, I did not know a lot of how to do what I'm doing today. So it all came from taking different classes and learning from other people and reading books and studying up all the training that's available in the private sector, right? And back then it wasn't a lot. So I was pretty lucky. The rest of the people were doing it the same way as I was. So the competition wasn't as hard as it is today, if that makes sense.
No, definitely makes sense. Yeah, again, I appreciate you sharing the insights as to really how you got started and how things were early on in the beginning for you. Now, executive protection is something that's been more of a popular topic among the healthcare security community, just because of everything that's happening in the world. There's been a lot more threats and really hazards directed towards the healthcare security, or the healthcare leaders in general, your CEOs and your C-suite folks especially.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really uncharted territory for a lot of healthcare security leaders. So I guess let's kind of do a foundational piece here in terms of protecting somebody like a hospital CEO. What are some of the considerations that we should be cognizant of?
Well, I think protecting a CEO who never have had security and haven't lived with security is a tough one in general. And I don't know how different it is in the healthcare sector, because I don't know that sector that well. But I know that every time you start an executive protection program, you have to be very aware of what kind of culture that is in that working environment. And I'm sure the culture in the healthcare sector is very different than, for instance, a Silicon Valley Fortune 500 or a manufacturing plant in Ohio or wherever the potential hospital or healthcare facility is, right? So you have to be aware of the culture. You also have to be very aware of who the CEO or who the protectee are. What kind of person is he or she? What kind of image and working culture and what kind of entourage is around the CEO or this protectee? And when you build the program that you have to build, you have to take a lot of these things into consideration, right? Because unfortunately, when you talk about executive protection, most of people's preset mindset comes from either the Secret Service, from books and movies, and from the celebrity world. And a lot of times it's very, very far from how it works in the real world, right? Because executive protection goes all the way from full service detail with protection agents, security drivers, the whole 9 yards. But it also goes to the other side, where it can be some very well thought out plans, maybe a really, really good electronic system, some support here and there by manpower, but mostly kind of like done by really good planning and taking care of the we call them the principals in the best way possible without making too big of interference in their daily lives and their work life, right? So when you think about that spectrum, executive protection is many things, right? So it's about figuring out where does this particularly healthcare institution fit in on that scale? What is the risk, and where do the person we're protecting fitting in?
I appreciate that. And I'm glad you made that distinction, because I think a lot of people's mind immediately races to what you kind of mentioned in the beginning there with the more exhaustive measures of having, a security detail 24/7, security drivers, but it really just can come down to good planning as well.
It definitely can. Good planning and good physical security as well, right? Because if the person working in a totally secure environment where you have, let's say, emergency buttons and you have to be beeped in or scanned in, or you have to show several forms of ID or whatever to get in there, well, he or she is probably pretty safe there, right? So it's arrival and departure to the facility that they work at, and then their home life, right? And the home life is always difficult because these days you can figure out where anybody lives, right? But when you really think about it, it's possible to secure a lot of people electronically and potentially with gates and walls and whatever. And some of them might live in high-rise buildings or whatever, if it's a downtown facility or whatever. So a lot of times you can do a lot without having physical manpower, and maybe just have one guy that manages all of these things. And then when the protectee go to special events or do public appearances or whatever, then you man it up whenever it's necessary.
No, absolutely. Now, I guess the closest equivalent that I can think of that you've probably worked with is, so outside of healthcare is probably just an executive, maybe in a corporate environment. Uh, what are some of the focal points there? Because I think that will be that will also help some of the folks tuning in really figure out their executive protection plans.
Sure. I mean, it's one of those things. Whenever you speak about executive protection, I always hear when I'm out doing consultancy or talking to people or helping people doing their plans, that every company and every protectee is always special. It doesn't matter where we go. I get the same things like, you don't understand, our principal doesn't like security. Our the one who you're supposed to look after doesn't like to have us around, and he thinks it's a big cost and all of these things. And that's actually pretty general. So I'll say that the parallels between the protection that I have done in kind of like the civil part of the world is probably somewhere between 65 and 85 the same. And then there's the last percentage that varies based on what kind of company is it and what kind of protectee is it. And when you think about it, most corporations actually probably have the same thing, right? If you go to the executive suite, it's typically always fairly difficult to find it. If you're an outsider, you really have to have some good insights. It's typically, you have to scan your way in maybe 2 or 3 times to get there. So there is a couple of rings. There's typically a PA or an EA who is kind of the gatekeeper, so you can't walk right in there. So in general, it is, and I would think it's the same in the healthcare business without knowing it. Of course, there are times when they have to get out of the bubble and meet with people and stuff like that. And that's both in corporate protection, but also I would think in healthcare protection is where you have to put your focus, right? Or at least start if you want to build a good program.
Yeah, absolutely. And that you hit on some great points there. But yeah, it's that same, I guess, that same holistic approach of all of the different the layers or rings of protection. So that definitely makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Is it safe for me to assume that you have, as part of your security details, some of your close protection details, I should say, that you've been within healthcare environments and that you've had clients who you've had to bring into those environments as well?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's fairly normal when you work protection details, and especially when you work with the principals for a long time, that they have to come to a healthcare institution either for visits or because they have some kind of a condition, or maybe because their family is giving birth or they're going through an operation or a procedure, or even go to healthcare institutions in other countries because there's specialists who kind of have the skill that the particular principal wants to go and work with that doctor or whatever. So I think most of the protective details that I've advised or worked with over the years have always had some kind of an element of working with healthcare. And there's also a lot of the principals that I worked for over the years who donate a lot of money. And most of the people who do that actually knows a lot about the healthcare sector, right? Because it's not like they Monday morning wake up and decide to give out X amount of billions to a certain field. So a lot of them have done a tremendous amount of research or traveled to countries where there is a certain problem or whatever, right? So I think most people who works in executive protection for a long time will cross path with the healthcare facilities one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the other thing I'm curious about is just your interactions with the security team, and I guess from the perspective of someone who is actually handling that close protection detail, what are some of the things that are helpful from the hospital security standpoint in terms of just making sure that your visits are going to be successful and that you're going to have good collaboration with that team?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question because there's 2 types of executive protection teams. I very much advocate the people who are very big on collaboration, meaning that if you're the chief of security for a hospital and I have a potential high level, high profile individual that has to go through a procedure or have to have a family that potentially has to give birth or whatever. So I would reach out ahead of time, make sure that I know who to call and who to talk to, maybe come and visit and kind of figure out what kind of procedures do you guys have? Because at the end of the day, I'm a guest in your house, right? So if I understand how security works in your facility, I'm sure it will work a lot better and run a lot smoother. And at the end of the day, another thing that a lot of people forget when you do the protection for the high level clients is that I'm also a representative for them, right? So if I come to your hospital or whatever, and I kind of come off as a little bit of a dumbass, chances are that that will reflect on my client as well, right? So it's super important that that we have that outreach and kind of work together. And I'm also sure that especially if my client is very, very high profile, and I saw this when I worked a bunch of celebrities, there's a good chance that we attract paparazzis or fans or whatever. So it's also in our interest to get help from the security team at the healthcare facility. So we might be able to facilitate maybe an underground arrival or arrival through parking garages or departure through there. But you'll never get that if we don't reach out and kind of like make sure that we all get along and figure out how do we do this the best way. The other type of executive protection teams are the ones that always kind of like stick to themselves and they tend to know better and stuff like that. And I don't see that often that they reach out and kind of like have that communication bridge and collaboration, right? And sometimes there's a reason for that, right? Because if their clients are very private, they don't really want any interference and they like to fly under the radar. So those are kind of like the two different ones. I personally is a big supporter of kind of like reaching out, because even if you want to fly under the radar or your client want to be very discreet, I trust that many of the people, especially in the top of the security system, can keep a secret, else they wouldn't be in that role, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting. You made me think back to an experience I had at I used to work for a company where we did some executive protection work, but it was at a different scale. The level that I was at least was at a different scale. But
Sure.
I remember I was working in a hotel because there was, it was really event driven. There was a band coming in, and the close protection detail for that band, the guy showed up the day before to do a walkthrough with me because I was kind of leading our close protection team.
Uh-huh.
But just the level of detail that he went in terms of just knowing where all the exits were and the underground parking, all of the ways into the facility. He just showed a different level of professionalism. He was obviously very experienced. He told me he talked to me about some of the people that he's worked with, and yeah, I was just impressed with the level of detail that he went in. So I think he's a part of he kind of reminds me more of that first example that you gave.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, there is one other way I just thought about where we as executive protection agents a lot of times kind of work with different hospitals and healthcare profession and stuff like that. And that is, if I'm working for a client that, let's say, live here in Las Vegas, but has to go to New York and he has to stay in a certain hotel, we go and do what we call advanced work and figure out what hospital would we go to in case of something goes wrong. And depending on the status of the client and the time you have to advance and how complicated the detail is and the risk, sometimes you do a full-on walkthrough of the hospital. And to do that, you typically reach out to the security at the hospital. And sometimes you just need to know where is the entrance and the exit of the emergency entrance or whatever, right? So we cross over quite a bit with healthcare professionals one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the association I volunteer with, the International Association for Healthcare Security and Safety, we do have guidelines on how to how to work with those high priority or VIP clients, if you will. So I'm sure a lot of this stuff is going to be helpful for a lot of folks tuning into this conversation, because you really Yeah, really breaking it down. And like I'm thinking now, if I was still in a hospital myself, I would have my plans organized for anytime there is a close protection detail, so I can just quickly say, when I get a call from a professional like yourself, like, here, this is going to be your best exits, things of that nature. So yeah, just giving some great things to consider.
Yeah. And we kind of all ask for the same things, right? And I see it a lot for high-end hotels and some high-end restaurants and venues. They almost have a pre-made binder that they either can send to you or they can give it to you when you get there. So you kind of like save a lot of time, and everybody kind of like has a better understanding on how things potentially could work.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm just kind of thinking in terms of, again, some of the interactions I've had with just individuals across the industry, and obviously doing a lot of travel with your work. How important is having a strong network for you?
Well, I usually say that network, especially in executive protection, is everything, because at the end of the day, if first of all, you tend to come back to the same cities a lot because your principals typically do business for a period of time in the same places. On top of that, the security industry in general is built on networks, right? Because once you leave one place, you typically go to another place, and chances are that you're coming back there again, right? And every city we go to, there might be 2 or 3 hospitals of a certain standard. There might be 5 or 6 hotels at a certain standard, and the same with restaurants and so on and so on. So when you've been doing this for long enough, eventually you start knowing everybody in that city, right? And if you're really good at what you do, I think networking is something that you should always work on. So what I do, even if I haven't been back to a city in a long time or whatever, and I see people that I worked with or whatever on LinkedIn or whatever professional networks, I reach out to them and I follow up on them and stuff like that. And I think we all can benefit tremendous from that. And in our business, network is literally everything, because if I use the example of me living in Las Vegas, but I'm taking a principal to New York, I might need local support. So the agents that I work with from different companies or from different principals might help me out. I might need support from local law enforcement or from the different hospitals, right? So keeping in touch with everybody and stay tuned on your network, I think that's super important.
Now, I just have a question that's kind of going in a different gear here, and this might be an unusual one. So I'll kind of cue it up that way just to get your creative juices flowing. But do you have a kind of a favorite failure that you've encountered over your career? And I think the way I'll kind of set the stage for that as well is, something that didn't go right or something that went wrong, maybe early on, maybe even recently, but you've been able to take something away from that's maybe been the foundation of how you do things, or it's just been really beneficial in your development in your career.
Well, it's really funny because over the years, I've written several books and wrote a lot of blogs and stuff like that. And most of them actually talks about the failures that I've made over the years, because I don't think anybody is perfect, right? And I'm the first to admit that I make mistakes like everybody else. And as long as the mistakes doesn't put our client in danger, or by any means kind of like ruin the program or the visit or whatever, and if it did, I wouldn't be around for very long. I think we can learn a lot from our mistakes. And I actually think, before I talk about specific mistakes, that this is one of the things where we in the security industry could learn a lot more from each other, right? Because typically security is very much connected with being alpha male and being kind of like, here comes I and all that stuff. It's rare that people talk about their mistakes. I talk about them all the time, right? Because that's really how we can learn. And the people that used to work for me know that I had a very much, I embraced the people that were brave enough to tell me and talk about the mistakes that we make, right? Finding a specific mistake is kind of hard, because one of the things that we have in executive protection is that typically the people we look after are extremely busy, meaning that every minute of a billionaire's time is super valuable. So the plans change all the time, right? If we have an agenda, the day before it'll probably change, and it'll probably change the same day, right? And when you think about that, it's very, very easy for us to make mistakes, right? Because a lot of times we don't know. And if the boss is sitting in a meeting room, he tells his EA to go out and change something, she's on the phone, whatever, we might be running around checking the route to the next meeting, and a lot of communication fault can happen. I would say the biggest mistake that I've probably been part of is probably 10 years ago, we took a very, very famous IT billionaire from America to visit different companies, and ending up visiting the parliament and the Turkish prime minister. And one of the hard things we have when we have a client that is that high profile is that we don't control the authorities. And I don't speak Turkish, I speak English, but at the end of the day, I don't speak Turkish. So we kind of went through the first part of the day without a police escort. And it's very normal when you have to go to the parliament and to the president or whatever, that you get a police escort, especially in a country like Turkey, where you have to get through multiple barriers to get in there. And one of the problems and one of the issues that we encountered back then was that we don't control the police escort. The police escort control us. So once the police escort kind of came to us, they start leading the convoy of cars, and we had 3 cars for the corporate side, and they had a lead car and a chase car. So there were 2 cars and a motorcycle from the police, and the motorcycle goes first, and then they have a lead car, we follow that, and then there's a chase car at the end. And we're scheduled to go and have dinner with the president, and we follow the whole motorcade, and we follow the motorcycle, we go into the palace, we come up to the door, the Turks jump out of the car to open the door, and the door is closed because the dinner has been moved. We knew that the dinner had been moved, but apparently the Turkish Secret Service hadn't gotten the last information. And I don't know if you can imagine how big the Turkish parliament is, but we had to turn around, go around the building and into the backside of it. And we ended up being 10 minutes late. But it's not something that we can do anything about. But it actually sparked a thing that I've implemented ever since. And that is, if we have somebody else who lead our police escort or whatever, to hire a local or a person that speaks the local language and ask if he can ride in the police car, just so we can coordinate kind of the information, right? And at the end of the day, I was pretty lucky because the client thought it was pretty funny that the police took us to the wrong palace, and kind of joked with us on the plane and after the dinner that the Turkish prime minister should use us instead, so he would save 10 minutes every time. But it could easily have gone the other way, and we would have been in a ton of trouble, right? But here it didn't get too bad. So that's at least one good story, I guess, of how things can go really, really wrong.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like you took a situation where it was obviously something got missed. It didn't end up being negatively impactful, but you were able to develop another great practice or another great procedure or policy. It was worth out of that.
Exactly, and it's one of those things. The first time it happens, there's probably none of us who has seen it before. The second time, we should have learned from it, but don't let it happen a third time, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, actually, when I was doing my executive protection training, the individual who was training me, one of the things that he kind of highlighted, it was a lot of these mistakes, your principal isn't going to notice that you made the mistake. So it's a matter of just kind of toughing it out, going through it, and then amongst your team, you guys hash it out afterwards. But in those situations,
I think you're very right, because I was sitting front right, and obviously I knew we were going to the palace, and I knew we were going to a door, but I don't know which of the 2 doors because we had never been able to advance it, right? But the local guy from the corporation that I worked for from Turkey was sitting next to the principal, and he was the one who told him about, oh, we're going to the wrong door, we're going to be delayed and all that stuff, right? I would almost have betted anything if he hadn't said that, the principal would never have noticed.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. It's funny, the guy who did my training, the example that he gave was, as the driver, he had missed his turn on one point, and the principal had kind of caught it. He's like, were we supposed to turn there? And he said, Oh no, he sold it off as a tactical thing. Like he was going to make the next left. And
Oh, yeah.
the guy was very appreciative. And at the end of the day, he just missed his turn.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the whole thing of fixing on the fly, right? And that's probably one of the biggest, almost positive traits, and one of the traits you have to have as a protection agent is to kind of go with the flow and live in the moment. So if things change, don't get freaked out, don't panic, just make sure that we get there and figure out the best way to fix it, right?
Absolutely. So yeah, so actually let's go there for a minute. You talked about some of the skills that are necessary to be a good protection agent. So again, I think communication obviously was an important skill. The ability to adapt on the fly. What are some of the other things that you look for?
Well, first of all, it's very hard for me to teach people how to be a good person, right? And by good person, I mean that the person we work for, they made all their money and came to the top of whatever company they're in before us, and they'll also be there after us. So it's very important that we understand the culture, we understand our role, and we work within that framework. And that can be very, very hard to teach, especially if it's a client that has a certain risk, and we hire people who are normally set in this world to mitigate risk and come from very, very hardcore backgrounds where it's kind of our way or the highway, because a lot of times it's a life and death situation, right? If you come from super high risk protection details, or if you're a special forces operator or SWAT operator or whatever, and God bless them, we really need these people. But a lot of times it's harder for them to understand that it's not always 100% secure. And that is okay, because the risk that we face is not all the time and it's not always there and stuff like that, right? And at the end of the day, as a protection operator, we're there on the client's, at least in the private world, we're there on the client's wish, and he can always make us go away, right? So a lot of times, if we can achieve 10%, 20%, 30% or 50%, even 70 or 90% security, it's better than no security. And a lot of times people have a hard time with that mindset, right? Because we're there to protect him. But if you don't want us there, we have to give room, or we have to let him go, or we have to pick him up again later, or whatever. And if that's what the client want, and the threat assessment and the company and everybody else accepts that, that's just the way it is, right? So understanding that, and I call it being a good person, and not kind of fight that, is very hard to find. Of course, there's all the obvious skills, like you have to be in reasonable good shape. You have to be able to kind of like do your job. By that, I don't have a preference. I mean, a lot of people come into this field with a very strong background from law enforcement, from the military, or very hard security background. I think that the physical things are easier to learn than the psychological things, right? So in general, I mean, being a good person, being able to adapt, understand, able to do your job, being reasonable fit, have security training is always a good idea. Even security training that's not bodyguard training or executive protection training, because we always work with corporate security, or we always work with other parts of security. So it's very, very beneficial if you understand camera systems, if you understand access control systems and stuff like that. And then, of course, being able to do the job and not being afraid of it, and all that stuff is pretty important in my world.
Awesome stuff. Now, again, I'm going to give you kind of an odd scenario here, but let's go back, 25 years ago, and correct me if I'm wrong in any of the details here, but you said 25 years ago, you made your first trip to the US with those musicians. Now, if you could go back in time and you can board that flight as, Christian West that I see today, not unlike myself with a couple of gray hairs in the beard. If you're able to board that flight and sit next to Christian West 25 years ago and give him some advice, what's the details of the conversation for that trip?
Oh man, that's a tough one. First of all, kind of on the private side, I would tell myself to relax a little bit more, because once you've been traveling the world so many times as I have and haven't seen a lot of stuff, take an extra day when you have the chance. Chances are you'll never go to the pyramids, or you'll never go to the Wall of China or whatever again. So make sure to see it when you're there. Even if your principal goes home and there's wheels up, stay the day and don't stay in the hotel. Go out and do stuff. On the professional side, I would say, if I look at my career, which has gone from being a one-man operator to running, building, owning, and selling one of the biggest executive protection companies that were ever created. I've actually sold 2 companies over my career, and I worked in corporations and stuff like that. I would tell myself to believe in myself more, because you can do this, and at the end of the day, it's only you who can do these things. So you really should, and take it all in, and in general, relax, but believe in it, and keep pushing forward, right? Because a lot of times I've been saying to myself, well, I'm just a kid from Denmark who probably can't do this, or I shouldn't do this, or whatever. And I've been pushed a lot by my wife, and I've been pushed a lot by the people who believed in me more than myself, right? And if I were to do something over, that's definitely one of the things that I would tell myself.
Absolutely. And it's great to have those kind of advocates in the background for you who are going to push you when you don't believe in yourself.
Exactly.
I think back to one of my experiences with one of my old bosses, when I remember I was at an arbitration. I was testifying against one of my colleagues, and I just remember sitting there, and it was like, for me, it was a terrible situation because, although something did happen that was inappropriate, I didn't want to be there testifying. And
Sure.
I remember my boss was sitting next to me when we were waiting to go into the mediation room, and he said, "This is going to be a great experience for you." And at the time, I was thinking, like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm a security guard. Like, I don't need to be doing this. But he saw, and I recognize back then, now looking back at it, just the way he helped me throughout my career, he saw something that I definitely didn't see in myself. And, I think the fact that he saw that is a big part of, why I'm able to be where I am today.
Yeah, I think so. And I think in general, there's an old saying that it's only scary until you jump, and then it's kind of over with the scary part, right? I think that's one of the things you realize when you've been doing something for a long time and you've gotten older and stuff like that. But especially in the executive protection world, because when I speak to clients and old clients, and I'm trying to figure out why did they pick me, or why did they pick my company, or whatever, one of the things that people always say is that they make you feel calm, and they make them feel like they can trust you, and you know what you're doing, and it's very professional, right? And that attitude and that demeanor you get from kind of like believing in yourself, getting the experience to do it, and not panic, right? And I think that's probably something that we should all kind of like strive to figure out, and it both goes in security and protection situation. But I also think it's very important, if you become a sales guy or a negotiator or whatever, that you don't try to overdo it and you don't try to underdo it. You kind of figure out who you are, and that's kind of like the demeanor and the attitude that you put forward.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. And I think one thing that's been helpful for me as well, and I'm just kind of sharing this for everybody who's listening to our conversation, but if something is important enough and given the right circumstances, if you want to get better at something, it's really helpful if you can be comfortable being bad or terrible at something for a bit until you're not.
Yeah, I totally agree on that, because that's really what you learn from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you can be comfortable with being bad at something, the sky's the limit at that point. You're not going to be any worse.
Oh yeah. No, and I think I don't know how it is in the hospital sector or in the healthcare sector, but I don't know if you can imagine, if security in general is kind of a masculine, kind of like alpha male business, executive protection is even more extreme, right? so admitting what you're not good at and kind of trying to learn that and focus on that instead of always focus on becoming a better shooter is probably what's going to help your career more than anything you've done before.
Yeah, and in that environment too, it's going to make you stand out because not everybody is
exactly
being that honest with themselves.
Exactly. So yeah.
Now, for anybody who wants to learn more about executive protection or anything, because you've mentioned a lot of interesting things such as starting businesses and selling businesses. What are the best ways to reach out to you, and what can we expect to see from you in the near future?
Well, I've just started a new little startup business called EP Access, which, to my knowledge, is the first only online school and training platform for executive protection. It will probably have elements of physical training as we move down the line, but I've done this for over 30 years, and so have a lot of my colleagues, right? And we have a lot of knowledge that is gonna die with us if we don't give it out to people. And in this age of how we now absorb electronic training, electronic medias, and whatever, I think the time is right for a startup that goes out and do online training for executive protection. So that's my new startup, and that's what I'm dedicated to, and that's what I'm going to be doing for hopefully the next many years if I manage to make a business out of it. But on top of that, I'm speaking at all the conferences where they want me to speak. I'm still writing blogs and books, and I'm on LinkedIn, Christian West. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, and whatever else social media there is. And in general, everybody that knows me knows that I'm a very helpful person, and I enjoy what I do, and I'm all about the industry. So typically everybody that reaches out get a reply and an answer, and I'm always there to help. And it's not for me so much about making money anymore of what I do. Of course, I run a company and I have a job, but I'm all about helping, and especially consultancy and helping about getting programs started or answer questions for people who start programs and stuff like that. So if anybody has any questions or whatever, hit me up, and I will do my best to get back as fast as possible.
Awesome. I definitely appreciate that, Christian. I wish you all the best with the new venture. I was going to say the best of luck, but it doesn't sound like you need luck. You have a pretty good handle on this after the time that you've put in.
I don't know, man. I think you create your own luck, right? But you of course need some luck. So thank you for that, and yeah, I hope it'll be a lot of fun. And if nothing else in business, if it's fun, it's worth doing, right?
Absolutely. Although again, I appreciate the time. It was an absolute pleasure speaking with you today, and I'm sure that there was a lot of great takeaways for everyone who listened in.
All right. Well, thank you for having me on, and I hope so. So thank you.
The Healthcare Security Cast is available on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, and Audible, and many other platforms as well. Check out our Linktree on your computer or mobile device. And this can be found at linktree/Brian Hamilton. That's linktr.ee/Brian, BRINE, Hamilton. Again, that's linktr.ee/Brian Hamilton. Or if it's easier, send me a text at 647-372-2042. That's 647-372-2042. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have or share any links you may be looking for. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, take care and stay safe.